All right. Well, we will let people continue to jump in, but we appreciate your time. And so we don't want to take up too much of it. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Couple of quick points, just some housekeeping as we're obviously in the age of Zoom. But we're going to run through a little bit of information on the project, share some of our recommendations. The Laurel Island project will be coming up to the Planning Commission tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. And if you go to the Preservation Society website on our homepage is a link to all of the information about the application, as well as information about how you can engage with the Planning Commission on the project. And we think that at this point is the most important thing we can do. So I want to thank everybody for being here. We know everyone's got a tremendous amount on their plate, but as you all know, the Preservation Society has been working for 100 years to really be an advocacy leader for the city of Charleston. And our whole formula is really truly about engagement. You know, we go back to our old ways, and we see that this has really been the way for many, many years. And so we really think that Laurel Island is arguably the single most important livability issue for the peninsula of Charleston at the moment. And we have a grave concern that it's moving forward during the summer of COVID, when people are truly focused on things like unemployment, increased crime, going back to school. So it's a very problematic time for any project to get approved, but especially considering the size and impact of a project like Laurel Island. So a little bit of background on the project itself. Laurel Island is the former landfill located off of Upper Morrison Drive, accessed from Romney Street currently. It's about 196 acres, and here you can see it within the context of the neighborhoods and the community. And here's a view looking south. And just want to first off state that the Preservation Society is in no way opposed to the redevelopment of Laurel Island. In many ways, it really is a perfect site for redevelopment. But we're going to talk a little bit about something called a PUD, which is a planned unit development, which will explain that a little bit more. And really our concern and focus is with that particular application and document that the current development team has brought forward. And so we will come back to that shortly. But as I said, Laurel Island has been a project that we've all heard about for almost 2 decades now. Bobby Ginn came in and before the recession and proposed a sort of golf course community. And then a group out of Atlanta came in a little over 5 years ago and rebranded it the Lorelei, and that ultimately failed, and that was a retail-heavy mixed-use development. And now we are back for the third version, which is currently being spearheaded by local development firm of Clement Crawford and Thornhill, and partners with another group out of Atlanta who we've yet to have the opportunity to meet with. But here you can see the general timeline. Here are some renderings of some of the previous proposals, just to give you a little bit of an idea of there is a long history of studying development on this site. But as we look at this property, as I said, we think it's a great place for development, but our biggest concern is this is moving very quickly through the city process and ultimately could be approved tomorrow night and then off to city council, at which point the zoning, the law of the land will be set and we will not be able to revisit it. So I want to stress how imperative it is that if we're going to improve this, now is the time to do it. So what is a PUD? Well, this is what the developers are applying for. This property was zoned as a landfill for warehouse, which is not a great zoning for really any purpose. So a planned unit development is typically what you see on a Daniel Island or a Nexton or along Savannah. Really new development, new neighborhood creation in sort of areas, remote areas. So they can be problematic when you put them in a downtown location that are adjacent to a lot of properties around. And so this is something that really we have been working with the city, working with the developer, trying to get this plan fleshed out, trying to push for more community engagement, which we've been pushing, I believe, the developer since February to get out and educate the community. And unfortunately, this really has only happened for the past few weeks at the request of the Planning Commission. The Society did meet with Mayor Tecklenburg and his staff, and we expressed our dire concerns. We've not heard anything in response, but we're hopeful that our concerns were heard and may have some impact on this as it moves forward. But what's clear is that the city is focused on the prioritization of flexibility because it's such a massive project. They want it to allow to morph and change with the market. Well, our concern is flexibility comes really at the expense of predictability, and we think that is what is most important for the community. So the PUD is what creates that either predictability or flexibility depending on which way we go. So it's a planned unit development, and what we're going to do is create zoning that's unique to the specific property, and it's done in accordance to a master plan. And what this will do is lock in all the fundamentals, the footprints of the buildings, the densities, the mix of use, the public space, all of these things that ultimately determine the success of a development. And the City of Charleston ordinance is very specific on its requirements for what must be in a PUD. And in our view, this application falls far short of those requirements. And so what PUDs do is they establish this vision, but then again, they also provide the DNA through zoning to ensure that that vision is met. So as we mentioned, Magnolia, on their PUD, you can see how the green space was laid out. You can see building footprints, the colors correspond to uses. There's a fair amount of specificity. Furthermore, it goes in to give you an understanding of what the public realm would look like, what the kind of character and feel of the development will be. So in coming forward to this PUD and this application, we're excited that they're committed to things like connecting to the environment, sustainable practices, social and economic diversity, quality public realm, and authenticity. We think those are very important and very supportive that those are front and center. But this PUD is also very aggressive in what it allows. So these are the densities. We're talking about almost 300,000 square feet of retail, over 2 million square feet of office, about 40 acres proposed for usable public space or parks, a 400-room hotel, and over 4,000 dwelling units and an 8-screen movie theater. And so when we look at the drawings, this is their master plan. And so, from a visual perspective, it looks quite nice. There's a lot of green space, but all of these building footprints are really hypothetical. They're not real, and they're not locked in by the actual PUD document that is being submitted. There are no land uses identified. It doesn't say what's residential, what's commercial. And so again, there's a lot of question about really what is in the PUD. As I said, the open space looks good, but really we need to focus on the language of the PUD because it only really requires a fraction of what we're seeing here. We also think that the blocks are very large. And just so you know, there are 3 access points proposed. Currently, Romney Street, which is the middle street, is the only current access. They're proposing to build a significant bridge on Coolblow Street on the south, which is the lower of the 3 connections, and then a bridge on Brigade Street as well. And that's how this will connect back to the rest of the peninsula. So, we want to say that we feel like improvements have been made. Eddie Bello, former city architect, architect with Bello Garris, came on, has really helped develop the plan. But what we're really struggling with is the actual PUD document, the legal document that's going with it. And we really feel like these details have to be defined now. So first and foremost, we urge the city that they need to have more public engagement on this plan. This is the single biggest concern. As we said, people are just not focused, not able to focus on these things. And this is the single largest entitlement that we have seen in downtown Charleston. And this is almost the size of the 29401 zip code in one application. So we really feel like they need the city and the developer need to engage the public and need to educate people, not only on the plan, but on what the actual legal documents call for and allow. So furthermore, to that end, we think that a detailed land use plan, such as we saw at Magnolia, has to be included in this. Really, as we said, it's very, very vague, and it allows for tremendous flexibility. We also think that they need to commit to a higher level of open space. As we mentioned, the plans, it looks, pretty good. We see ball fields, we see a walkway around the park, which would be a tremendous asset for the entire community. But again, this is a great example of how the drawings show one thing, but when we go, and I apologize for all the text, but when we go to the PUD itself, what the PUD basically allows for is 9 acres of usable public space versus the 39 that we see on that plan. And so these are the type of things that really have to be tightened up, because the drawings are not the law. The PUD will be the law. So again, the drawings show one thing, but we've got to make sure that the PUD ensures that what we see is what is going to happen here. So we really believe that the 40 acres that they've shown seems like it's a very good approach, a good start, and we want to see that as a requirement in the PUD document. They've also proposed their own internal review process. Instead of having the Board of Architectural Review, they will create what they call the LIBAR, or the Laurel Island Board of Architectural Review. This will consist of 3 members designated by the property owner and 2 designated by the city. The LIBAR has authority, though, to change the densities. If they want to get rid of 1 million square feet of office and convert that into, I don't know whether that means 2,000 or 3,000 more residential units, they have that authority. They just have to follow a standard traffic formula for converting office space to residential space. So again, these ideas, these densities that we've showed you can move tremendously. We think that is an incredible amount of zoning authority that is being given to the developer at this point and to an internal review committee, and we find that to be very problematic. They can also move the height districts. So looking back here, we can see these are the proposed heights. So in red, we have 12-story buildings. In purple, we have 8 stories. And then fortunately, particularly as we get closer to some of the historic resources, like the cemetery district in Magnolia Cemetery, it does appropriately step down to 2.5 to 3.5 stories. But again, their internal review board can change these should they desire. And if there's one thing we know about developments of this size, the group that we're talking to today very likely will not be the group that are making these decisions and actually building these buildings, whether it's in 5, 10, or 25 years from now. So again, it's critical that we get this right. In their earlier version, their Board of Architectural Review could also create the parking requirements, which again, we felt was a massive overstep for an internal, for a property owner to be able to assume control of. So in the most recent version, they have just said the PUD requires no parking. And so I think that's an element that really does need to be studied farther, because again, we're talking about a massive amount of program. And so we've got to figure out how that parking is going to work. And I think the city and the community needs to have some understanding of how that will actually happen. One of, I think, the most important aspects that we've talked about at great length is workforce housing. Given the size of this project, we believe that this presents the single largest opportunity that the city of Charleston will ever have to make a meaningful impact on what has clearly become one of the single biggest problems or crisis that our region is facing. So we're very pleased that the developer has offered 10% of all of the housing units to be made workforce housing in perpetuity. And that in perpetuity, we cannot stress how positive that is. But they've come back based on the input from numerous community groups that 10% is really not enough. And so the developers have come back and offered an additional 10%, but those are only required to be affordable housing for the first 10 years. So if the PUD would be approved this fall, in 10 years, those would not go away. And what we know is the sewer, the infrastructure, the roads, the settlement issues, it will take probably a decade to even begin building buildings. So while that looks nice on paper, we just don't believe that it actually moves the needle. And so we really feel like 20% needs to be really the held to standard for what this project can do. Again, we've never seen anything of this scale, and we think this is critically important to make sure that this development supports the community as well as the developers. And you know, with the uses that we're talking about, we know that it's going to have a massive impact on congestion and traffic on the Upper Peninsula, which, as we know, compounds as it moves down the peninsula. So here again, you can see the 3 primary connecting roads, Coolblow at the bottom, Romney in the middle, and Brigade at the top. And so what we know is that Brigade and Romney cut all the way across the peninsula. And we know with 2 million square feet of office that you're going to have a lot of traffic going to West Ashley. And we have grave concern about how this traffic will move across the peninsula, much like we've seen with the traffic already generated by the West Edge development moving in the opposite direction. So we really feel like the traffic plan needs to be studied further. Furthermore, the roads that they are proposing are very large-scale roads. And on Coolblow Street, it's a very, very narrow right-of-way, quite honestly, that only a single car can pass at one point. And if we're talking about, 300 plus cars, a massive amount of traffic, we don't believe Coolblow Street can handle it. And as was said earlier, it's a residential street, and it has a pickup and drop off for the Meeting Street Academy, which is just expanded. And we're very concerned about the traffic impacts on Coolblow Street. But again, we really worry about Rutledge and UG and a lot of the other Upper Peninsula streets. And so it's critical that we try to understand the traffic more. And if you have an incredible amount of patience and time, you can read the 500-page traffic report. But this is just a quick summary we've cut and pasted some elements of one of the tables. And what this is an intersection analysis. And if you look, streets are listed on the left, so Meeting in Conroy, Brigade, Meeting in Isabella, Meeting in Coolblow, Meeting in Romney. You can see the current grades for those intersections. And there's a morning and an afternoon. So we're going from A's and B's and some C's at Isabella. When we go over, we're now at D's and F's and C's and D's and F's. And so we know that this is going to have a major impact. And I think that just needs to be understood better. It needs to be explained better. Their plan calls for adding turn lanes on Coolblow Street. And again, there's no space for things like this. And so again, a lot of things have to happen to even achieve the grades that they're showing for these intersections. And without them, those grades pretty much all get down into the F range. So very important that this be understood by the community going forward. So in response to the Planning Commission, the developers have created a website we encourage all to take a look at. It's called meetlaurelisland.com. It will present the plan to you, but it will not present the PUD. It will not tell you what the requirements will be, what the DNA, what the zoning will be going forward. So we encourage all to look at this. They have commented that they've received, I believe, a couple hundred comments. Well, the problem that we've talked about to the community is the comments that go to the website go to the developers, and they control those comments. What we need is for everyone's comments to go to the Planning Commission and then go to City Council. So we encourage you all to go to our website, which is preservationsociety.org. And on the home page is a link to Laurel Island, and there's a lot of information. You can view the agenda, you can review the actual PUD document, and there's information about how to engage in the meeting itself. And we just really appreciate y'all being here. We appreciate y'all tuning in on this. We think it's critical. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions. We'll encourage y'all to type your questions into the comments section. And my associate, Erin Menigan, our Director of Preservation, is going to do her very best to filter those questions. And apologize if we're not able to get to them all, but we'll do our best, and we want to get you out of here in a little under 10 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. A few questions have trickled in, and we're going to do our best to get through them. If not, we're happy to follow up with you after the webinar. Thought we'd get started with a pretty basic question about the feasibility of this development, which I thought was a really good one, which is, how is it possible to build on top of a landfill? How will this development be structurally sound? And I thought this would be a good opportunity to address our understanding for the plan to bring in fill material to prepare for the development.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great question. There are those in the community that are questionable that anything can be built here. So one of the key things that the team has worked on is really overcoming what are extreme technical challenges. They've put an incredible amount of work into that. But what they're proposing they do is they are going to basically cap the whole site with heavy material that will artificially push the settlement down, because it's a landfill, so it's settling over time and gases have to come out. So what they'll do is they will basically cap it for a period of time that will cause that settlement. And that's also one of our reasons why we're concerned that the 10 years for affordable housing from today is meaningless, because ultimately they have to do so much prep work for the site. But essentially, it's a layer of garbage on what I like to say is about 60 feet of Jello pudding underneath it. So everything will be pile supported. They are talking about not pile supporting the roads and the infrastructures. They will build in tolerances to allow those to settle with the island. Because it's a landfill, it's very high. So they're not in a flood zone per se. So they could actually build buildings at grade, which we think is hugely positive. But there's no question it's incredibly technical. And access is one of the biggest problems because you have, I believe, the CSX rail spur that comes and takes care of Union Terminal. Well, that blocks Romney Street. And so obviously for fire trucks and code, they're going to have multiple points of entry. So they have proposed, and DOTs are reviewing a massive bridge from, as we said, from Pueblo Street out to the project. I don't believe they've even begun thoughts on the bridge at Brigade Street. One of the interesting things on the plans is it actually shows that bridge going through one of the Bridgeview apartments. So we're not sure if they've, whether that's actually going to even be possible, but defer to the development team for that answer.
Great. Our next question pertains to the design review process. Do all PUDs have their own internal BAR? Can Laurel Island be subject to the Charleston BAR?
So most PUDs have some form, but typically these are utilized in more suburban locations. So it's sort of like a Daniel Island. You have a homeowners association that creates a set of rules and guidelines that are then enforced by a local board. So this is very much like that. They will develop what they call the Laurel Island design guidelines, and those will go to the BAR large, the city's BAR large, for approval. And then once those guidelines are approved, that becomes basically the standard by which that board operates. So it's not unusual. I guess it's just unusual for a project of this scale and this proximity to the peninsula. And to answer your question, could the BAR authority be extended? That's a very good legal question. I think the developers would have to welcome that. And I don't necessarily believe that the current Board of Architectural Review is necessarily the right entity to do this because it is a new district. And so, our concern is let's get the guidelines that are really great, that really articulate what we want to be. And again, we just are far from that at this point. We'd like to see more of that before the PUD gets approved. But then we also really need to create a process that allows for community engagement. Right now, what they say is if you are not a landowner, which there is only one landowner at the moment, or if you don't have a substantial interest in the property, you can't appeal any of these. And so if somebody were to appeal, it would then kick to the city and the BAR large would then approve it. But as the PUD is basically written, the way I read it is pretty much only they can appeal their own project. So we don't necessarily think that that provides a satisfactory level of design review for the city.
Thanks, Chris. We've actually received a few questions regarding how the PUD contemplates mobility and transportation planning. Specifically, does this plan offer mass transportation, bus lanes, parking rides, or bike paths?
Yeah, so our friends at the Conservation League have done a great job focusing on this aspect of it. We've been working closely with them, and their street sections allow for ample room for bike lanes, which we think is tremendously positive. Some of their larger roads actually even have dedicated bike lanes that will be separated from the lanes of travel. So it's obviously a much safer way to do it. So, bicycle mobility, we feel like has been strongly considered and we're very supportive of that and think they've done a good job on there. As for bus routes, the current routes really run up Morrison and Meeting Street currently. And so there are no plans that we are aware of, and we're welcome for input to the contrary, but of bus routes that would service within the property. Obviously, that would be a function that would be required or would be funded and supported by CARTA as the project develops, based on ridership. So as we said, we are, their whole plan for parking is they're saying they're going to provide more resilient practices and therefore they won't have a great reliance on automobiles. We think that is hopeful. We think that's tremendously optimistic and we hope they're correct. But back to the parking issue, we really do feel like they need to build in some clear guidelines on how they're going to support cars coming and going once they get in this property.
Thanks, Chris. You've touched on this in your presentation, but to just demystify what this community is meant to be, we did get a question about, is this going to be a gated community, a private community? Will there be public access to Laurel Island? Is this going to feel like part of the city of Charleston?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the vision and understanding is this would be an extension of the city, so it would be public. That's always a little bit dicey when you get into park spaces. Their PUD does state that their intention is that for the city to ultimately take ownership, but the city has to be willing to take ownership because obviously costs come with maintaining parks. But they've said that, some of the spaces will be owned by the property owners and will be privately owned, but they have stated a commitment to allowing public access, potentially with hours of operation, which is not entirely unusual. And so, I do believe the hope is that this is truly a public realm and an extension of the city. And we think that's tremendously positive. And as I said, one of the most, I think, exciting aspects is that they want to have a linear ring park all the way around the island that would have bike paths and pedestrian paths. And, we really feel like the developer's getting a tremendous amount of entitlement. So what we want to make sure is that the community is getting an equal level of benefit. So public access, bike paths, affordable housing. I mean, these are the critical things. And we also think that it's critical that they engage with the community so that they really feel a part of this plan before that plan gets codified tomorrow night.
Great. And we're coming up on 10 minutes here, so I thought I would just ask one more question, which kind of covers a few questions we received, which is really just about next steps for Laurel Island and what we can anticipate going forward. What happens if the Planning Commission approves Laurel Island, and when can we expect to start seeing buildings out there?
Well, I think next steps, the Planning Commission will hear the application tomorrow night. If they approve that plan as submitted, which, to be honest, we hope they don't, it would then move to City Council and would have to go through a public hearing and 3 readings to be approved by the city. That probably, I guess, could happen as early as the first meeting in September. It does appear as though the City Council and the city is also very supportive of the plan. So if it were to get all of its approvals in the order that I think the development team would like, I guess it probably could be approved in October, before the end of October. As to when it would be built, again, there's no current infrastructure. It is a landfill. It is settling. That's a very technically informed answer that I don't have. But with my understanding of what they're dealing with, it will be some time. They've also created a tax increment finance district, a TIF district, which allows all the tax monies from that area to go into the infrastructure. But again, we know that this requires coordination at the local, county, state, arguably potentially even the federal level. And so there's just a tremendous amount of work to go into a project like this. So I'm not holding my breath that it's going to be in a year or 2 or even 3. And that's obviously assuming that we are able to maintain a fairly positive economic and market outlook. Should that change, obviously this could slow down substantially. Now, the flip side is if it were to be deferred, the Planning Commission could defer it for 30 days until their next meeting and encourage them to undertake more public engagement. Unfortunately, state law will require that they then vote on that at the next meeting to either deny or defer. They would not be able to defer again, so they would either have to approve it or deny it at their next meeting. Our sense from the Planning Commission is that there is support for this plan and they don't want to deny it. So I think if it's deferred, it would basically give 30 days and then they would have a second crack at it where we expect that it probably would be approved. And then the last option is if the plan were to be outright denied, which would send the signal to the developer that they need to either go in a different direction or substantially improve their application. And I don't think anyone thinks that this plan needs to be thrown in the garbage bin. But the reality is there's a lot more detail and a lot more community outreach that's needed And so that's what we hope happens. Not that it's denied, but that they're able to do that. So we are under a tight time frame. Our hope is that we can at least get 30 days from the Planning Commission to really push on the community engagement. We hope that the city will respond and respond positively to community concerns. So the single most important thing is that people reach out to the Planning Commission, send your comments in, attend the meeting, speak at the meeting. They need to hear from the community. And I would already start reaching out to not only your member of City Council, but all members of City Council, because this is a critically important project, and it's just critical that we get it right. This is about ensuring that our processes going forward support the best outcomes for Charleston, and we really need the help of council on this. Great. Well, that was our last question. I want to thank everybody again for your time. We know everyone's incredibly busy. We hope that this was informative. We hope that you learned something. We hope that you have a better understanding of this project. And most importantly, we hope that you will engage with us and bring your voice to the community to focus on more community engagement, a better commitment to workforce housing, and a better commitment to usable open green space going forward. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you for being a member and a supporter of the Preservation Society of Charleston. And we very much hope to see you at the Planning Commission tomorrow night. Thanks so much.